Hi folks, today we're training round 2 of Nauvoo Exodus, establishing the Church on the Missouri. We're trying to record this one more time. Hopefully it'll work this time. Never in the 16-year history of the Church was their physical situation more tenuous, their economy more fragile, and their very survival more in question than the fall of 1846. This is a period of the history of the Church we don't have to talk about, but this is the part where they're at the very lowest part, socially and economically. Because of a lack of any and all resources, their survival depended on a high degree of social bonding and an economic order where the private interests of individuals came secondary to the welfare of the whole. This is really a tough time for the history of the church because Brigham Young is a leader, but he's not the prophet. The saints are strewn from winter quarters to Nevada to Nauvoo, which is 1,000 miles, and there's 10,000 of them straight across this entire land. At least 4 principles guard the winter quarters economy. Once they got to winter quarters, they had to follow 4 principles for their economy to work. Community self-sufficiency. The Lord had commanded them to be self-sufficient, and so they're trying to be self-sufficient as a community while not turning too much on the Indians, which they end up doing, or end up on each other. Consecration. They're living the law of consecration. Most of them have not made covenants in the temple, but they're still living this law. Equitable distribution. They agree that they've got to distribute things equally. Some will have a lot, some will have a little, but everybody needs to have some so that they're going to distribute it equitably. Then individual stewardship. They believe that each person has an individual stewardship to God to do his very best to make things happen. These, of course, principles mirror Joseph's law, section 42, practiced earlier in Ohio and Missouri. To administer this program, a major change in ecclesiastical history occurred. The calling of local bishops to preside over relatively small numbers of people. Up to this point, there had only been presiding bishops. They presided over the whole church. Now we're going to break the church into little teeny wards, and they're going to have a bishop each. Winter quarters was divided into 13 wards with the bishop over each whose primary responsibility was to provide for the poor and to devise a means to eventually care for themselves. Again, the focus here is not the bishops taking care of the people. The focus here is for the people, the bishop to find out what the people need, and the people to provide for themselves eventually. Despite these positive initiatives, death took its toll on malnutrition, scurvy, malaria, and other diseases wreaked havoc among the saints. In fact, between June of 1846 and May of 1848, almost 2 years, 1,003 documented or estimated deaths occurred, amounting to an alarming death rate of 1 in 10 persons, the majority being women, twice as many men, and children, 53% of the total deaths. This left a lot of men wifeless and childless. It was a terrible tragedy in the history of the church. All is not gloom and doom, however. Despite the fact that we have 1,003 people die, and most of them women and children, people are still trying to carry on. Young people met and fell in love. Others carry out the tasks of homemaking. Bishop Whitney's store became the center of social interaction, and the council hosted night dances almost nightly. Imagine a dance almost every single night. Yet, with winter quarters also became the place of practice made the peculiar doctrines kept secret in Nauvoo. Now, what had happened is during the Nauvoo period, they had some doctrines that they had to keep secret because they're still in the United States of America. And many members of the church would never understood them. First and first one of those is giving blessings. Women who had not received their endowments in Nauvoo were not elected. Women who had received their endowments in Nauvoo were not elected to lay on hands with or without a male priesthood and pronounce giving blessings. They believed that the endowment gave them the power to become officiators in the priesthood. And so they would do that. As more men left and sickness increased, the occasion in which women blessed and ministered to the sick by the priesthood, appearance in her and disgrace today increased. Try to imagine a woman laying her hands on your head and pronouncing a blessing by the power of the priesthood she held because she had been endowed in the temple. Now we have people in the temple today who perform ordinances that are women because they have been endowed, but this practice was seen as bleeding over into priesthood blessings back then. Some claim to do so by the power of the priesthood which had been conferred upon us in the house of God in connection with our husbands. They believe that they held the priesthood. They believe that there was the Aaronic priesthood, then the Melchizedek priesthood, Then, if they were in doubt, they entered into this state of being where they held the priesthood with their husbands. Several factors contributed to this, including social injunctions regarding the gifts of the church, gifts of men, and needed death and disease. In addition to women giving blessings, there is the more dramatic occurrence of plural marriage and adoption ceremonies were also practiced for secret and they were over in winter quarters. Let me talk to this for a second. Plural marriage, of course, was plural marriage. It had already been practiced in Nauvoo. But adoption ceremonies were for those people who were first-generation members of the church who believed their parents didn't want them in heaven, so they were adopted into another family. Churches believe that just as Christ claimed the priest's authority spring from his royal lineage to Abraham and David, and also the Levites, their claim to priest's authority was also based on that lineage. Yet it was confusing how such blessings could come to them. Similarly, parents should scorn their church membership. The solution lay in the doctrine that the apostles were related by blood to the lineage of the ancient patriarchal order, and the marriage or adoption into their families resolved this problem. And so, the members of the church would be sealed to a member of the 12, as many as could. We have people like George Buchanan who had over 1,000 people sealed to him. Brigham Young, Heber C. Kimball, etc. You'll have many people sealed to them because they believed that this, because they were apostles, that they received authority through Christ. Consequently, not only were women sealed to their husbands, husbands and their families were sealed as adopted sons to permanent church authorities. The practice of the law of adoption had a most dramatic impact on the social order of winter quarters, for example. Not only affected one's sphere of influence in circle of friends, it determined the location of one's tent or wagon, Dunn families living in close proximity. So you had Brigham Young's family living in the center of town, who had been adopted by an apostle yet living on the outskirts of town. However, the practice of the law soon spawned serious jealousies, as well as growing the units into one or the other greater families. In time, this was discarded in favor of studying one's personal blood lineage, but it went according to the influence of this practice a substantial impact on the social environment. Another practice of the dramatic impact was plural marriage. It was impossible to be sealed to someone without receiving permission from the prophet himself. With the saints strung across the state of Iowa, that was not always possible because Brigham Young wasn't there. Considering the practice of plural marriage was impossible. By the time the Advance Committee was regrouping in Cherokee in February of 1826, several, especially women, felt free to discuss the matter openly. Most of those in that first company were privy to those things anyway. Now, that company likely carried with it a bulk of Nauvoo's plural marriage households. Eliza Snow, widow of Brigham Young, the widow of Joseph Smith and now wife of Brigham Young, said, "Feels as though we could breathe more freely as people could learn more about these things." Strict control regulation was not an easy task with 11,000 people spread over thousands of square miles. While this practice was at first confined to various large adopted families, the practice eventually became more widespread. As with the law of adoption, the practice of plural marriage arose several jealousies. The critical problem the authorities faced was controlling the practice. Now, most people who practiced plural marriage only had 2 wives, but the 12, like Brigham Young, had many wives. In fact, when Brigham Young dies, he has 87 wives, and so the practice was controlled by the prophet, but the closer to the prophet, the more wives you could have. Others in the church recognized authority over this practice. Plural marriage without such explicit permission was termed adultery. For example, there was a couple that lived in Palmyra, Utah, that was just the 2 of them, just the man and the wife. And he traveled to Great Draper to go to work in the mine. But the mine was so far away and all he could do was walk. He decided to stay there during the week and rent a room from a place where they were renting. While there, he fell in love with the woman who owned the place. She was a widow, and so he married her. So he has 2 wives, one in Draper and one in Palmyra. He goes to the one in Palmyra on the weekend and then with the one in Draper during the week, and they did not know about each other. Eventually, the woman in Palmyra became suspicious. She brought her husband to work. She went up to the house in Draper and knocked on the door, and the woman said she was Sister So-and-so, which was the same name as the sister who knocked on the door. Well, the problem exploded, and the brother was forced to get a divorce from the woman in Draper and just live with the woman in Palmyra. but he left his wife and he left his wife and child there forever. Many problems with upon marriage. What is one man was not liberty to choose anyone he wanted. His first was intact. He had returned to a faithful disciple. Children were practiced by the Lord through revelation. He must also be able to provide economically for additional households. In favor of speaking on the practice of spiritual adoption, Brigham admitted he still did not know much about it. I will attain to more knowledge on the subject across the saints, and constantly unable to teach and practice more. The next day he felt suddenly at unrest, as he sat there dreamed that he saw Joseph sitting in a chair in front of a large window. Taking Joseph's right hand, Brigham asked his friends why he could not be with the saints. It is all right, Joseph said, raising his arm from the chair. We really have a great opportunity to understand the law and doctrine of sitting practices, Brigham said. If you have a word of counsel from me, I should be glad to receive it. Tell the people to be humble and faithful and sure that they keep the spirit of the Lord, Joseph said. If they will, they'll find themselves just their own as my Father in heaven before they came into the world. The counsel did not answer his questions about adoption or sealings, but reminded him to obey the Spirit so that he and the saints could be guided to greater understanding. Considering the unending tribulation, disappointments and temptations to settle in Iowa and mid-world wilderness crossings, and great visibility of the peculiar religious practices, the Church survived sizable membership losses between 1846 and 1852. Many said that they had been through too many problems and that their happiness lay somewhere beyond. Discouragement and hunger ranked high as the community factors. So many lost so many loved ones and family members. They had their hope and enthusiasm and faith that they once had. Some followed George Miller after he refused to stay Brigham Young. Later, Alpheus Keller, former president of the Women's High Council, came to be convinced he was called by the Lord to redeem Zion by enlisting help of the Indians to fight against Missourians. Many is one of the main group breakout of the says today, Kellerites. Others was led away by former Apostle Lemon who had become a colony in Texas. Miller has also executed the church lessons of Bethel had been placed in the 12. He stayed for JD Street Train also had to be including members to break off the church.